Hey BookTube, welcome to Jackie's Literary Corner, and today I thought I would talk to you guys about the classics I want to reread. I'm also going to do a video where I talk about the 100 classics, 100 classics that I want to read. And I'm not saying to go for reading to read a 100 classics. I mean, I already, in my Goodreads goal, I've decided to be ambitious and daring and make my Goodreads goal 150 books, and Storygraph goal, I just made the same thing. But I'm not going to set a goal for half of those books. Most of those books being classics. So, but I cannot remember which booktuber I watched, but one of my favorite booktubers did a video on the 100 classics they want to read. So I thought I would do that as well. And this applies to basically the 100 classics I want to read, like, not necessarily, obviously, like I said, not this year, but maybe in the next, 5-10 years or so. But I do not have that list prepared right now. I'm still working on it. In fact, I'm only in my up to 26. But, well, the classics I want to reread it's a considerably smaller list. Now, my most recent reads in the last 2 years have been, starting this year, I've already reread Rebecca and Emma. But last year I reread A Tale of Two Cities, Jane Eyre, which that was my third time. And I can't remember what else I've reread, but I have reread, the ones I can think of are, I've reread The Great Gatsby 3 times now, Jane Eyre 3 times, and A Tale of Two Cities was twice, counting last year's reread of it, and I reread Peter Pan twice, I believe. So I'm debating if I want to reread that for the third time, because for some of the reasons for these ones is a similar thing, which is that I feel like I need to reread it one last time before I officially, I'm like, okay, this book just, now I'm not going to get rid of it because I want to give it to my nephews and my niece. Although, I don't know, I might want to buy a different copy for them. A nicer copy than it's just part of me feels like I kind of want to keep that copy because it was from Borders Books. Like, every major bookstore conglomerate had their own edition of classics, I think. Or like a publishing company that published certain editions of classics. Like, there was the Barnes & Noble ones, which, I really love because, mostly because each one is a different color, so I think that's kind of cool. And then Borders had one as well. Borders Bookstore had their own. I don't know if bookstores like Crown Bookstore ever had their version of classics or not, but so this list is considerably shorter. It's not 100, obviously. Okay, so first I'm gonna start with a classic. I guess it was a modern classic, even though it's set during the 1800s. It was published in 1936, and also this is ironically one that I feel like has received some backlash lately because of its content. But I still want to reread it because I still think it's an important classic to read because it's part of our history, and that is Gone with the Wind by Margaret Mitchell. Now, like I said, it does have some controversial issues like racism in here, so if you don't want to read about that, then this is not a good classic to read. Also, I like, I want to be able to once again say I finished this book, and it would be kind of nice to say I finished it within, instead of years, only 1 year, or a few months, 6 months at the the shortest. It would be nice if I could read it within that time frame. But this is about our heroine Scarlett O'Hara. It's set during the Civil War. She is the daughter of a plantation owner, an Irish plantation owner. And she is in love with is in love with Ashley Wilkes. But unfortunately, Ashley Wilkes must marry his cousin Melanie because they're part of the same cloth, and him and Scarlett are not. But she's in love with the guy, and of course opposites attract, as they say. But she also has a guy that's in love with her. She eventually, this guy, Rhett Butler, falls in love with Scarlett because they're so similar, and they're both feisty, and but she doesn't like him. She can't stand Rhett Butler. So she ends up kind of being forced to be friends with Ashley's fiance, Melanie, and they end up living together because she ends up being married to, ends up finding herself married to Melanie's brother, Charles. And it's all about them surviving during the war and doing their part and being scared because, of course, Georgia is being attacked, and just them doing their part, and Scarlett just trying to keep this secret of her love for Ashley while they, but Rhett Butler, of course, knows that she's in love with Ashley, but he still is in love with her, and we also, she goes through quite a lot of, she marries 3 guys in the story, 3 different guys at 3 different times, and even becomes a businesswoman, and she's always been the black sheep, and she's the black sheep of the family, of this community, and, like I said, there are, of course, her family does have slaves. Okay, so, like I said, if you don't want to read about that, I wouldn't recommend this classic. But it has been around for a long time, and, it was made into a movie. I don't remember, I cannot think of the actor's names at the moment. Which, like I said, because of the controversy, the movie, I think, has been taken off the air. People don't play it anymore, but luckily I have it. I have my own copy of the movie, a special box set edition of the movie. And, it's about 1,024 pages. So I want to reread that one. And then next I want to reread a more, next I want to reread a classic that the first time I read it, I was expecting it to be like the movie version of it, and it's not, and at the time I was kind of bored. But now I'm willing to give it another chance, and what I read so far, because I have started I attempted to start my reread last October, but that did not go well. There was no follow through with that. I did read some of it, but I just didn't get very far. And that is Dracula, one of the first vampire novels. Now, I don't know if this one came before, Camille, I think, is one of them, and there have been other vampire novels, and so maybe this is not the very first one, but it is part of that group that kind of what our impression of vampires is. So in this it's an epistolary novel, so it's told through letters and diary entries. And first of all, we are with Jonathan Harker, who he's, I think, a lawyer or something? Or a solicitor? No, I think he's a lawyer. And he is summoned to talk to this infamous Count Dracula in Transylvania, but he has no idea that Dracula, the Count, is actually a vampire. And even on his way there, everyone is trying to warn him to, this man is the devil incarnate and all that. Of course, he's, completely oblivious. And, of course, now we, as the reader, are like, oh my god, Harker, turn back, listen to these people. They are right, you can't, and he ends up getting stuck, and he actually ends up getting stuck there and almost dying in the Count's castle. So, his entries are his observations with the Count, and the Count actually seems like a normal, maybe a slightly eccentric, rich guy. But then he starts to do some weird things, and Harker sees a lot of weird things at his castle, and he even sees the Count climbing the walls, and course, the infamous scene of him being, attacked by those female vampires, and it's all like it's very unsettling. Now, if you like I said, if you're don't expect this to be like the movies, like the original movies. It's very different from the movies. And so we get his interaction with Dracula, who's trying to buy some land, a famous estate or something. And then we also have his fiancée Mina. We get her diary entries, and we see her and she's community. She's been receiving letters from Jonathan. Does not is worried about him, of course. And it's her interaction with her best friend Lucy, who something happened. She's a bit of a flirt. She's like 3 guys vying for her affections. And we see, and then something strange ends up happening to her, where she ends up getting, when Dracula finds her and bites her, she ends up getting attacked by Dracula at some point. And I think we also get her perspective at one point too, her diary entry as well, for a little bit. And then we get one other character, Dr. Stewart, who is one of the guys that likes Lucy, and he ends up he is working with he's a doctor, and he's working with one particular patient, Renfield, who likes eating insects and rats and stuff, and he turns out to be enticed and hypnotized by Dracula and becomes his servant. So it's like I said, it's not exactly like the movie, but I still think it's very interesting. And like I said, depending on the story itself, for me is if I'm gonna like an Episcopalian story or not. Like there's some like Pamela and there's one more I read that Evelina, where it's basically about what they were about, kind of just bored me. And so the heroines in those stories, just I didn't like them. I'm sorry, no disrespect to women of that time period, but they were boring to me. They weren't interesting to me. And but this, the idea of the looming shadow and presence of Dracula makes the story more interesting. It's not just them coming out to society and becoming part of society. It's so much it's a horror, and I think that's so much more interesting than coming out to society and finding love and blah blah blah. At least in the form of a diary. So yeah, I want to reread this now that I'm a little bit older, and the content might be more interesting to me now. I mean, so far, the little bit I read does definitely intrigue me a little bit more than. And also, I know that it's not. I'm more prepared to know that it's not going to be like the movie, so I can look at it in a little different, from a different perspective. And then we have another epic horror, and that is Frankenstein by Mary Shelley. I love this book, and I want to reread it. This is the 200th anniversary edition. I really like this edition. It's like the artwork is really cool looking, and I really enjoyed it. I found it made an impression on me, and I definitely want to reread it again. It's basically, you have our main character, Victor. He is obsessed with the idea of immortality and things bringing people back from the dead, and wondering if you can do that after, if I remember, his mother died. So he's obsessed with the idea of bringing life. If you can play God and bring life back. And so he, through various different bodies of other living other people that died, he creates this entity, this human, made out of different parts. But he ends up, when the human comes alive, when he gives it life, it wakes up and Victor is completely disgusted and abandons his creature. And his creature decides to come looking for him. And and starts throwing everything he holds dear, because he wants Victor to make him a companion, someone to so he won't be lonely, or at least to if he can't be there for the creature and support its existence, then make someone for him. And it begs the question: who is the true villain? Frankenstein, the creature, seems like a monster physically and does some scary things, but then again, so did Victor, and he just happens to not look scary, So it's just a fascinating story, and just, the idea. And there's actually a show starring Sean Bean came out. I don't remember when, and I don't think we're ever going to get another season, where he was an inspector investigating crimes that were similar to what happens in the story, and then he ends up becoming the creature. He becomes the creature himself at one point in season 2. Rascal! He keeps pawing at my leg. He's so sweet. Stop! Okay. And next is one I read, I think I don't remember when I read it, if it was in middle school or not, but this is another special edition version. Now, I had the anthology or omnibus, or I don't know what it would be called actually, of this author's, some of his short novels. And this one obviously was included in it, but I wanted a paperback copy, regular copy, so I could carry it around and it would just be easier to read. And that is John Steinbeck's Of Mice and Men, and I think I read this in middle school. This is basically about these two friends, Lenny and of course it doesn't say it. Lenny and I can't remember the other. Let me see. Maybe it says his name on the first page. Lenny and sorry, I'm trying to find the name. Oh, and George. Lenny and George, set during the Great Depression, and they, are traveling through California and end up at a farm, and you have end up at this farm getting work there, and you have Lenny is this big guy who seems kind of scary. He's not necessarily has the same kind of intelligence as George does, but he also is someone who's very sweet and kind, and a sweet and kind person, is very gentle, a gentle giant. And George is a very practical, sensible man. He's smaller, and he's and smarter than Lenny. But he's very loyal and really cares about Lenny and will do anything for him. And like I said, they end up getting a job at a farm. But I don't even remember, so I couldn't even really spoil you because I don't remember what exactly happened. I just know that Lenny gets himself in trouble without realizing it, without understanding, and George has to help him and defend him. and I remember it is a bit of a sad story, a sad ending, and I think I remember what happens, but I am not sure. Either way, I want to reread it, especially like because I feel like, again, this is another situation where at the time I didn't like it, but now I feel like I can appreciate it more, and maybe I would like it more now. And also, I like these editions of Steinbeck's books. I also have Grapes of Wrath in this edition as well. Now, East of Eden is the regular penguins with the black border and stuff. And the next book is one that I never technically finished. So I really should put it on the other list, the 100 classics I want to read, but I'm putting it on this list. And that is Treasure Island by Robert Louis Stephens. Now, I was kind of disappointed by The Curious Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. But I did like, so far I've liked the other stories in that particular edition of Jekyll and Hyde, which is The Bottle Imp and what's the other one? The Bottle Imp, and I can't think of what the other one was called. But either way, it's gonna come to me. It'll probably come to me after I'm done filming or in the middle of filming. I like those. I wasn't like, oh, these are the best short stories ever, because I have a love-hate relationship with short stories anyway. But I like those better than Jekyll and Hyde. But really, I think Jekyll and Hyde could easily be resolved and made better if they didn't, if Stevenson had not put it just from a perspective of people that weren't as close to Dr. Jekyll, people that were actually on the inside, not just people that had been hearing it secondhand what was going on in that story. Like, that was the problem. I think the perspective should have been, we should have got a different perspective, like someone on the inside, or Dr. Jekyll himself, I think would be more interesting. I would love for someone to rewrite that one and do it from Jekyll's point of view. So, Treasure Island, like I said, I started it, but then I got bored and changed my mind with this one. Because, again, this is just like with Dracula, where I was expecting... Now, this doesn't have an... Well, okay, actually, it does have adaptations. It has the Muppet Treasure Island, and then I don't know if it has the other adaptations. But I was not thinking of an adaptation. I was actually expecting to be kind of similar to Pirates of the Caribbean, and it's not, and I should have known better. Oh, well, and there's also, I've seen Treasure Planet. I really like that one. That's like the sci-fi version of Treasure Island. It's really cool. And I do agree it's an underrated Disney movie. But I was expecting to be kind of like Pirates of the Caribbean, and of course it's not. So I'm going to give this another shot and not, instead of assuming that, oh, it's going to be just like Pirates of the Caribbean, because now I know it's not. And like I said, I've had a lot more experience, and like this coming summer, I want to read some adventure stories and stories about traveling, on the sea and everything, like, Treasure Island, the Odyssey. I'm trying to think of what else. And I know I'm gonna pick up Priory of the Orange Tree during the summer, because that's when I first started reading that one. I'm gonna pick up that one too. So, but yeah, I want to give it another chance, because I think now I might actually appreciate it, if not love it. Okay, so, and by the way, this is basically about, in case you don't know, this is about a boy named Jim Hawkins, and he discovers a treasure map, and he ends up joining a crew to find where this treasure is, and it turns out he ends up being stuck with pirates, and he forms this father-son bond. Of course, I'm I might be also thinking about Treasure Planet and their iteration of it. I don't know how correct that is, how accurate that is to the original story, but from that, I believe he forms a bond with the Long John Silver, the pirate Long John Silver, who's an infamous pirate. So I just wanted to give this one another shot and try again, and it doesn't look as big as the mass market made it look out to be. It's the problem with mass market. Mass markets make books seem chunkier than they really are, and this is not as chunky as that seems. Okay, and then next is I have 3 Dickens I want to reread. And just like some of these other ones, they are ones that I want to give another shot to. So first is one of them is one that it's like I want to give another shot to. But first, let's talk Great Expectations. First, I love this cover. I love that it's like a painting. I think that it's really pretty with the bluish purple. And this also has an introduction by George Bernard Shaw, the guy who wrote Pygmalion. The playwright who wrote Pygmalion. But this is basically about our main character Pip, whose parents died. He is raised by his married sister, who does not like Pip. She resents him. She can't stand him and treats him like a servant. But his brother-in-law is really kind to him, and she even passes him off to get rid of him for the day by getting rid of him for the day once a week to live with, to visit this woman, Miss Havisham, who is a little bit eccentric and is living, is a mad woman. She is living with the memory of being jilted at the altar. And she has an award, this young girl who she's trying to kind of, teach and educate. And basically they kind of take advantage of Pip and manipulate him and corrupt, and then, but then one day Pip inherits money from an unknown benefactor, and he gets to experience life amongst the rich. And that really changes him to the point where he kind of is neglectful and cruel to his friends, the people that always have been there for him. And it's all about his coming of age and his experience with this, and his relationship with Miss Havisham and Stella as the girl. And just how money can influence you, and not always in a good way. Like, if you have it, all of a sudden you could be, it might not necessarily. Now, I don't entirely agree. I think money doesn't make a person a bad person. Yeah, it can make you somewhat greedy at times, but I don't think having money makes you a bad person. I think, it just makes you a lucky person, a privileged person. But I do think it can potentially happen, sorry, there's something on this book. Okay, got it. But either way, I liked it. I still liked David Copperfield better, but I definitely want to reread this one. And then, next we have the one that I read, is the one that I was thinking of that I'm kind of giving another shot. And that is Oliver Twist. This was one I read a library edition of it. I got it borrowed it from the library, and I read it the year we went to Florida to spend, I can't remember if it was in October, I believe, when we went. Because because Terry and my mom both were like, do you want to do the Halloween Horror Nights thing? Which I didn't, because I don't like the idea of people chasing you, and I love watching those kinds of movies and stuff, and reading those books, but I don't like the idea of being chased around by some person that, even if they're a character in a costume, are going through a ride where it's already dark enough as it is, But then on top of that, there's all the scary stuff all around you, and it's even scarier because, like, which, yeah, I mean, it's supposed to be. But I was never comfortable with that. I mean, it's one thing to watch a movie and stuff like that, but it's another, or, and it's also, it's a comfort. It was, and yeah, I've been to things like Bennett's Curse back in Maryland, but my dad was there, and I'm a little, so it was easier, it was not as chicken. I mean, this is what the Halloween Horror Nights were talking about at a theme park, which is much bigger. I mean, granted, Terry was going to be there, of course, and she would, but I still wasn't comfortable with the idea. But anyway, so anyway, that's when I was reading this book, and I was trying to get it done so that by the time we got back, when I could just return it, and I wanted to get it done before we met up with Terry, but before Terry joined us, and I felt like I kind of rushed it. So I wanted to take my time with it and not rush it this time, really take my time. I mean, I guarantee you the things that bothered me the first time are still going to bother me, like Oliver Twist's character. I don't like characters when they're one-dimensional and clearly, or like symbolic or something, I like characters that are more complex, and like Oliver Twist is just too goody-goody. I mean, and I feel like Dickens has had that problem in some of his earlier works, where the women and the children were so goody-goody and so angelic figures and pure and innocent and stuff like that. And in real life, the children and women are not like that. We're complex creatures. We're just as complicated as men. Just because we're women or because they're children and they're innocent does not mean they're not complicated. And kids are not that perfect. Sometimes kids can be brats. Even the best kid can be a brat. So yeah, that will still kind of annoy me too, but it's at least, like, it won't be as, but like I said, there's so much more to the story than just Oliver himself. But it's basically Oliver is an orphan. Most people know the story of Oliver as, like, Oliver is this kid who gets mixed up with a bunch of street thugs and thieves and stuff like that. Like, led by Fagin, which was a controversy with Fagin because he was described as the stereotypes of Jewish people, and they found that was disrespectful, so that garnered a lot of controversy. And I do believe that there's one of Dickens' later works kind of tries to make up for that with having a good character being Jewish. But we also have, like, where Oliver tries to get away from this group of thieves, but because of he learned something and gained some knowledge while being with them, they just won't let him go. They keep trying to hunt him down, and Sykes, who is in the Oliver and Company Disney movie, his character is in that one, but he and Fagin play a bigger role, and Fagin is a little more sinister, a little more evil, and we also have Oliver going with two different families, Mr. Brownlow and this other family who I can't remember. I know that they live in the countryside of England, and so I feel like there's so much more to this than what you get, than what you get in plays and stuff, and, adaptations of it. And which is funny because it's not even as long. I mean, it's not as dense as some of Dickens' other work, like Bleak House, or, the next book I'm going to talk about. But either way, I want to reread it, and I think it could potentially, this will be another situation where I think I will appreciate the book more now, and maybe like it a little bit more now. Okay, and then the last book, not the last one I want to talk about, but the last Dickens I want to talk about is I want to reread David Copperfield, which is another coming-of-age story about a young man growing up and becoming a man. You have our main character, David, and he, I always get it mixed up with Great Expectations with the plot, but it's all about him growing up. He goes from poor to rich, rich to poor quite a few times. And it's all about how that influences him, just as Great Expectations is all about how Pip is influenced. And like he gets an education, and he falls in love with he falls in love with possibly the wrong girl. All about him growing up and learning to become a young man during this time period. And in fact, this was Dickens' favorite, I think. And actually, this also was kind of a memoir of Dickens' life, his childhood. And I remember liking this a little bit more than Great Expectations. But this one is going to probably wait until I reread some of Dickens' other book, like finish A Bleak House at least, or finish The Pickwick Papers, before I reread this one. Because I would like to read a few more of Dickens' longer works before I get to this one, because this is another one of his longer works. And this particular edition is about 765 pages. So it's not even, it doesn't even count as a mammoth. So, yep, I want to reread that one. And then let's talk my two Jane Austens I want to reread. And that is first everyone's favorite Jane Austen novel, and that is Pride and Prejudice. I want to reread this one. I like this color, the color of this one. The green, the pea green color. And I don't think I really need to tell most people. Well, I guess I'll explain what it's about. But I think most people probably know what this one is about. You have this family of 7 daughters, and of course during this time, they couldn't inherit the family fortune and would have to go to the next male relative. I guess it's supposed to be Mr. Collins, the person on the cover. The next male relative could be the one who would inherit the house. So their mom, the Bennet, Miss Bennet, is trying to get her daughters married off, particularly her 2 eldest, Jane and Elizabeth. Jane is very quiet, she's very reserved, she's very shy. And then you have Elizabeth, who's very feisty, she's highly intelligent and clever. And she can be a little judgmental. And she's kind of a rebel of or at least what is considered a rebel of this time period. And this eligible bachelor shows up. This eligible bachelor who's very rich, very wealthy. Mr. Bingley shows up, and they immediately think, let's fix him up with Mr. Bingley. And he also comes along with his best friend, Mr. Darcy. And immediately Darcy is also very judgmental, especially of the Bennet family. And he doesn't make the best impression on Elizabeth. But he finds himself taken with her. And meanwhile, Jane, so it's all about this miscommunicating relationship between Darcy and Elizabeth. There's even a bit of love triangle because Elizabeth falls for Wickham, who is a soldier, and he does not, in his opinion, makes Jane's opinion of Darcy even less favorable than it already is. And it's a classic. Everybody loves this piece. Everybody, of course, wants to be Elizabeth. Every young girl wants to be like Elizabeth Bennet, including myself. And we're all looking for our own Mr. Darcy. So it's a classic. It's one of the most popular of Jane Austen's works. And then I want to reread, which I think this is one of her more underestimated works. Although, same with Persuasion. But, which, funnily enough, though, I include Persuasion in it, but Persuasion is not my favorite Austen novel. But this is Mansfield Park, which we have our main character. In this one, our main character, Fanny Price, she is sent to live with her relatives, the Bertrams, because her parents can't afford to raise her as well as her other siblings. And she becomes part of the Bertrams' lives, and unfortunately, though, most of them kind of take her for granted, treat her less than because her family is very poor, and remind her, you better be grateful. And her only friend is Edmund Bertram, who is very kind to her, very respectful towards her. They get along really well. They're best friends. They understand each other. And when she gets old enough, she starts to fall for Edmund. But he doesn't see her in that light. And he ends up, and meanwhile, Lord Bertram is away. These new neighbors have moved in, the Crawfords. And it's a brother and sister, and they are immediately intrigued by the Bertram family and kind of corrupt them a little bit. They even try to get them to do a very inappropriate play, or at least what was considered inappropriate at the time. And Henry Crawford is, he flirts with Fanny's two female cousins, and eventually, when they're both gone, one of them is engaged and ends up marrying this guy her father chose. He is immediately interested. He sets his sight on Fanny, but Fanny sees right through his crap. And then you have Mary Crawford, who at first she sets her sight on the oldest Bertram, but then because of course he's going to inherit the family money. But she realizes but then she starts, I don't remember why exactly. Like I said, I need to reread it, but she realizes that she's no longer interested in the oldest Bertram, but she's interested in Edmund. The problem is that Edmund wants to be a clergyman, and she doesn't approve of that. She does not like that idea. It's all about the Crawfords getting to the Bertram siblings and corrupting them, and how Fanny sees through this corruption. But it's just, I feel like Fanny is, because she's not as passionate or strong-willed, or at least she's a more passive character. So people do not give Fanny enough credit as a character, because and Olive from Book Olive does a really good video that's called something like "Don't Sleep on Mansfield Park" or something. That she does a really interesting discussion on Mansfield Park and how people don't give Fanny enough credit. And the same, and Katie from Books and Things with her partner, she also does an interesting discussion and review of Mansfield Park as well. But I definitely want to reread this one as well. And then we have the last two books our last two books. I want to reread Emily Bronte's Wuthering Heights. This is another one. I got the library copy of it, and now I have my own copy of it, a paperback, the Penguin Classics edition. And I love this cover. I think this cover is really pretty. And this one is a little more, it's definitely not a classic to start with if you're new to classics, because it's kind of a little complicated. It has a very Inception-like type plot where you have a story within a story. It starts with one of our main characters, let me see if I can get Mr. Lockwood. He has inherited Thrushcross Grange on the moors, but the original owner is a little more standoffish and is not as welcoming to Lockwood. So he ends up leaving, and after he has a little bit of a disturbing encounter with what he thinks is a ghost, he leaves the house, the Thrushcross Grange, and he ends up meeting Nellie Dean, who was a former servant. And who knew the residents of Thrushcross Grange. Sorry, I have to, because I always get my THs and Fs mixed up. So she tells him the story of Heathcliff and Cathy, and their tumultuous relationship, and how they, and how toxic it was, and and how the cycle repeated itself with the next generation. Now this is not most people make the mistake of seeing this as a love story. It's not a love story. It's like, this is not a love story. Because, like, Kathy and Heathcliff have a very toxic relationship. They kind of abuse and use each other. This is more of a, you should look at this as more of a revenge story. Like, someone getting revenge from being treated badly. Like, Heathcliff is, I believe, a gypsy, and he is taken in by this family, and gets mixed up with Kathy's family, and he falls in love with her. But she kind of treats him horribly. But she also sees him as her twin, so to speak. He's, they are one and the same, so to speak. And it's such an interesting story, Like I said, don't look at this as a romance. Look at this as a revenge story. And then the last one I'm going to talk about is Crime and Punishment by Dostoevsky. This is my fourth Dostoevsky. Now, I've read a little bit more of him. I still have not read enough. Like, I keep going back and forth between going ahead with my reread of this or reading, where is it? Here it is. The Brothers Karamazov, because I remember watching, and I have been tempted to read them at the same time, but then I always think back to, Scott from, Gun, Fiction, Powder, and Plot, where he, in a comment to him about the read-along for, I don't know if it was, I think it might have been this one, and he was like, he was like, I would not read both of those at the same time, because, Dostoevsky's writing, he's very philosophical and very dense, like a lot of classic authors are, so it might be a bit of too much of a challenge to read to Dostoevsky, and it might drain me a little bit, because it might be too much. So it's like, on the one hand, I'm like, oh, I'm gonna take that risk, but then on the other hand, it's like, well, maybe that will be too much, and I don't want either of those books ruined because of that. But I love the story. This was so awesome, and and I imagine a lot of people would be surprised that I love this so much. Like, a lot of people in my personal life would be surprised that this is one of my favorite classics. Basically, it's a story of a student who is in debt. He's very poor, and he decides to commit a crime to get himself out of his situation. But meanwhile, and it's all about him dealing with the guilt of that crime and thinking and being paranoid that he was going to get caught. And there is a police officer that's hunting him down, and trying to determine if he's the killer, if he's the one who committed the crime. Meanwhile, there's this subplot of his relationship with his sister, who one of her suitors, she ends up having three suitors in the story, and one of them, actually, I think two of them both try to blackmail his sister into marrying them. And she is not too keen on that. So there's that subplot as well. But yeah, I just remember this being so good and so interesting. Anyway, sorry, I got distracted for a second because I started reading one of the chronological events of Dostoevsky's life. But I definitely think, this is so good, and I just enjoyed it, and I definitely want to reread it, but like I said, I feel like I need to read some more Dostoevsky before I jump into rereading my first one, because I feel like I haven't read, I've only read some of his short stories or novellas, but I haven't read, I read, I think, Notes from the Underground, and I can't remember what the other one was called, his two novellas. So before I reread this one, I need to read one of his novels. So I'm gonna read Brothers Karamazov, and then I want to read The Idiot, and then maybe reread this one, or maybe reread this one in between the Brothers Karamazov and The Idiot. Okay, so those at the moment are the classics I want to currently reread this year. if you guys read classics, then what are some classics you want to reread that you are your favorites? Or what are classics that you like? This is not my, like I said, this is obviously not my video where I type out the 100 classics I want to read. But I would be curious, what are some classics that you guys want to read yourself? If you haven't read any classics but you want to get rid of them, get into classics. What are some classics you want to read? Or you can, apply to what this video is about, which is classics that you want to reread that you love. If you like this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up, click subscribe if you haven't already, click the bell notification if you want to be notified when I post new videos. Wear your mask, get your vaccine as soon as you can. Stay 6 feet apart from people, wash your hands and hand sanitize. And even if you get the vaccine, you still need to be careful. Don't neglect being cautious, just because, oh, now I have a vaccine. Now I have the vaccine, so I'm good now. It's like, no, we're not good yet. We're not out of the woods yet. And please just be kind to each other, okay? Not just during times like this, but anytime, and, just be kind to everybody, no matter what. Just kill them with kindness. Alright, I will talk to you guys later. Alright, bye.